Hey, what's up everybody? This is Osterberg501 and today I want to go over some more leaks we have gotten for Diablo 4. Now these leaks come from a Reddit post, so there's no way to verify if these are true or not, but we have gone over a bunch of other leaks that come from Reddit posts that ended up to be pretty accurate. And with how many leaks for Diablo 4 have been coming out, and with how many of those have been accurate, I would not be surprised if these are legitimate leaks as well. Now these leaks are said to be from a Diablo 4 string list that's been floating around, and now I was not able to find this, but that doesn't also mean it's fake because a lot of the other leaks we've been getting for Diablo 4 have been released into other regions. For instance, we had a pretty big leak that was on only Russian websites, so if you didn't have the direct link to that, it was incredibly hard to find. So that's a pretty big possibility with this. And we get a few bits of information centered around different drops and the different world tiers in the game. So starting off, there appears to be a type of item called sacred items, and these start dropping in world tier 3, which is nightmare. There's also a type of item called ancestral items. These start dropping in world tier 5, which is torment. There's a type of monster beyond elite monsters called champion monsters, and these start showing up in world tier 3. Then nightmare sigils, which unlock nightmare dungeons, start dropping in world tier 3, and rare nightmare sigils start dropping in world tier 4, and there are 5 world tiers in total. And a lot of this information is just extensions of information we already know. We already know there's going to be a world tier system in the game. We already know about the nightmare sigils that turn dungeons into nightmare dungeons. We've gone over that in multiple videos. And for the elite and champion monsters, this just seems to be a little bit of a different version of what is in most other Diablo games and most other ARPGs. You usually have the different type of elite or rare monsters or champion monsters that are usually different colored. So maybe one would have a yellow name or health bar, or one would have a blue name. I'm assuming that's what these are, and them showing up in world tier 3 is just a more powered up version that would be a bit more focused on endgame, and these would probably start to have new and much more powerful affixes on them. Now the most interesting thing about these possible leaks is the new items, which are the sacred items, which start dropping in world tier 3, and the ancestral items, which start dropping in world tier 5. And I don't really know what these would be. These could potentially just be scrapped ideas they had in the past, or this could be different variations on different pieces of gear as you get more into the end game. Now specifically for ancestral items, back early on when Diablo 4 was announced, on one of the earliest quarterly updates, they actually laid out all of their item rarities they were working on, and one of those was ancient items, which were colored white, and those were said to be a season specific item that they were working on that would be something coming in a future season, or would be a season specific item rarity. Now these item rarities that they laid out were changed pretty heavily later down the line in another quarterly update where they removed a few rarities from this, but they never touched on if they were removing ancient items or if that was a rarity that they were still planning on having in the game at some point. So my best guess for ancestral items would be whatever these ancient items are that seem to be either season specific or just a new rarity that will come in some season of the game. And don't have any idea for the sacred items. Now that is kind of the first theory, and the second theory that a lot of people were talking about in the comments of this is that these could potentially be Diablo 4's version of ancient and primal ancient items from Diablo 3. Now if you don't know what this is essentially upgraded versions of legendaries. So in Diablo 3, normally you would have a legendary item that has its different affixes on it, and then it has its legendary effect on it. But then you would have ancient items, which would be the same legendary item with a different border on it, and an ancient item would be the same as the normal legendary item, just its affix rolls would be higher. So say if a normal legendary would say roll up to 750 of a main stat, the ancient one would roll up to 1000 of that main stat. But the ancient item would still have a random roll. So say that main stat would go from 825 all the way up to 1000, and it would be randomly rolled when you get the item in between those two numbers. But that brings you to primal ancient, which would be the same legendary item. It would have a different border than ancients, but it would be a guaranteed god roll on everything. So where the ancient item would roll 825 to 1000 of that main stat, the primal ancient would just roll 1000, and all the affixes on it would all be guaranteed the highest roll you could possibly get. it. So something like that in Diablo 4 is what some people are theorizing these sacred and ancestral items are, pretty much just upgraded legendaries, and then the ancestral items would be that higher roll legendary, just with guaranteed maxed out stat rolls. And the third theory would be that these are just different resources or different items that aren't actual gear pieces that start dropping as you get more into the end game. Maybe these would be resources to be able to craft higher tier items, or to be able to guarantee different stats on items you're crafting, or something like that. That's the more boring version, and that could be a possibility, but I'm leaning much more towards that these would be actual gear pieces and that these would be kind of different rolled versions of gear in the game. And the final thing in these potential leaks is the Nightmare Sigils. Now, if you don't know what these are, there are going to be a ton of different dungeons, over 150 in Diablo 4, and once you start getting into the end game, you can earn Nightmare Sigils, which turn any of the dungeons in the game into Nightmare Dungeons, essentially meaning these are end game keys for those dungeons, and every key is to a specific dungeon, and it can augment that dungeon in a bunch of different ways, adding different affixes, making it harder, giving you better loot. And this says that these will start dropping in World Tier 3, but rare Nightmare Sigils will start to drop in World Tier 4. Now, we've never heard of there being a higher tier of Nightmare Sigils, but this is something that would fit pretty well into the game and into the dungeon system. So you could have these much rarer to obtain Nightmare Sigils that maybe give you much more loot in these Nightmare dungeons. And my theory with these is that these could potentially be a kind of replacement for kind of like juiced maps from Path of Exile, just in a much more simplistic way, which is something I would expect from a Diablo game. They're not going to have near as much complexity, especially with kind of base systems as something like Path of Exile would. So having this kind of be a replacement for that is something I could definitely see happening. And if this information does end up being true, I could definitely see these rare Nightmare Sigils being able to roll with much more rare affixes that heavily change up a dungeon. For instance, you could maybe have like a much higher chance to spawn loot goblins in this dungeon. So maybe this dungeon is just completely filled with loot goblins, and this is just a crazy super rare Nightmare Sigil. And we do know that there are loot goblins in Diablo 4 because there is the art on ArtStation from one of the artists working on Diablo 4. They actually look really good. And there can even potentially be other things. Imagine getting a rare Nightmare Sigil that's like a cow level or something in a specific dungeon somewhere. Stuff like that could definitely fit into having a higher rarity, higher tier Nightmare Sigil for these specific dungeons that could potentially heavily change up what you're actually getting or what's actually spawning in that dungeon. So next up, there were a bunch of leaked images from one of the tests for Diablo 4. Now, I can't show you any of these images, but I want to go over some of the information shown in them. Now, the first one is very interesting because it shows the list of different acts in the game. Now, this is in another language. I think it's in Russian, but we can still glean the general information from this list. So first off, it seems like there is a prologue at the first section. Then it goes acts 1 through 6, but then there is also another section below act 6. Now, my thinking is that this is probably some main quest stuff to introduce you into all of the endgame systems and maybe have some additional story into the endgame past when you completed all 6 of the main story acts. And there is also a scroll bar that is not currently being used in this section, so most likely the UI is being designed for when new story content is added into seasons, which is content that I would say is guaranteed to be added into the main game when that season is over. And a lot of these other screenshots are showing us just a little bit more of stuff we've already seen. And something to note, a lot of these screenshots are much higher quality, and the game does look really good in general. We have a character selection list. It looks like you can have 10 total characters. This seems to be the main realms. Like I said, this is all in different languages, but it seems like you'll be able to have 10 characters on the main realm. There is a tab at the top, is probably for switching to seasonal realms whenever that is added in. Then we have a bunch of different screenshots showing the character customization, and specifically in a lot of these, they are customizing tattoos on this character, and it looks like you can place tattoos wherever you want on the body. I'm not sure if these are specifically just different areas and they just have a ton of different options for putting tattoos different areas on the body, from the face all the way down to having them on their legs, or if this allows you to just move tattoos around on the body and place them wherever you want. It seems like it's the second option because some of the tattoos are partially covered by clothing, and this seems to be the least clothed that this character would probably be. So it seems more likely that you're able to just choose a different tattoo design and put it anywhere on the character's body you want. And then there are a couple dozen colors. You can change all of these separate tattoos to different colors. Then there are a bunch of different face options. There are a bunch of different jewelry options, and I'm not sure if this is going to be for every character or maybe only a specific class, but it does look pretty cool. This will actually put jewelry on your character, and there's a ton of different options. There's earrings, there's necklaces, there's different pendants you can have on the necklaces, and it seems like you can have a lot of these on at the same time. And you're also able to, while customizing all these different tattoos and colors and stuff, you're able to try on or at least put on one set of armor so you can see the different tattoos and placements, how it would look with this armor on. And then they also go into game and go through some of the different menus right when starting off, and this is specifically a sorcerer, and one thing they do is they bring up the spell tab for the sorcerer, and this shows that there are currently 24 spells for the sorcerer, all organized into different rows. And I've gone over this when I went over all the different spells for the different classes. All of these spells are in their own different categories. So specifically for the sorcerer, there's like minor spells, major spells, ultimates, stuff like that, and you can use any of these different spells and categories in any combination you want. So if you want to use 4 spells from major and then 2 spells from somewhere else, you could do that. You can mix and match as many as you want, except ultimates, because we did learn you could only unlock one ultimate at a time. And this also shows that the sorcerer, at least at lower level, is only going to have 2 enchantment slots. It shows the 2 passive slots at the bottom you unlock at level 15 and 30. Now these are the sorcerer's unique class mechanic, where you essentially just put an active spell into one of those slots and it turns that spell into a passive effect that you get. So I'm not sure if they're only going to have 2 in the entirety of the game, because it was shown that they could have 3 before, or if maybe the 3rd slot is just shown later down the road and you get it when you enter the end game. Then we also get another screenshot, a little bit of a more high quality screenshot of the current skill tree in the game. And one of my last videos, when I went over the almost hour long of leaked gameplay, I thought that the skill tree was actually an unfinished UI in that, but getting a bit higher quality of a screenshot, it more looks like that this skill tree is almost using a fog of war in the skill tree, because it seemed a little bit bland just with some of the icons around, but it seems more like that you just don't see everything right now. So it looks a little bit more bland because there's not as much there. And my guess with this would be that once you get further into the tree, it unlocks more sections of that tree once you get to them, to try to avoid the issue that's in Path of Exile, is that the first time you open up their ridiculously massive skill tree, you have no idea what's going on. And that has probably caused quite a few players to quit that game right when they see that skill tree with hundreds or possibly thousands of talent point selections, to just quit right there because it's way too confusing and complicated. So that could definitely be a design choice, to only give you sections of the skill tree at one time, and once you get to other sections, then it pops up and shows you that additional section. And that's pretty much all the information we have gotten from different leaks for Diablo 4. Some new interesting information. Like I mentioned, if the first bit of leaks we went over ends up being true, there is a ton of interesting information and possibilities with those 2 different item drops and the possibility of higher rarity nightmare sigils. But that's pretty much all I want to go over. So subscribe if you want to see more Diablo 4 or other videos. Leave a like if you liked the video. Comment down below what you guys think about these possible leaks, and thanks for watching.